Hey everyone, welcome to Peer to Peer Abuse. I'm Rosalie Rivera. Let me just switch over here. I'm trying to multitask here. One second. All right, welcome everyone. Hi, we are talking about how to reduce the risk of peer to peer abuse because it has been on the increase and a lot of parents don't know about it. So, today I'm going to share what I know, the research that has been coming to light, and what you can do about it. So, welcome to today's live stream. I am here on both Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Let me just make sure that we are live on Instagram because sometimes that gets tricky. So sometimes this doesn't work. If you don't see me on Instagram, that would be because it's not working. So we're going to see if it works. But in the meantime, welcome to today's live. I'm Rosalia Rivera. I'm the founder of Consent Parenting. I am a consent educator and child abuse prevention specialist. I educate parents about how to reduce the risks for child sexual abuse, both by educating their kids as well as the adults in their lives. So, welcome. If you're new, please say hello and let me know where you're tuning in from, and that you can hear me. Sometimes technology is not always on my side. So, if you can hear me, please let me know, post it in the comments, and let me know that you can hear me because I want to make sure that this information doesn't go to waste. So, all right, let's dive into it. First of all, I just want to say thank you for being here. If you got my email, if you are on my email list and you're here, thank you for signing up, for being proactive, and for being willing to address this issue, which is not always the most comfortable. This topic is not something that parents want to talk about all the time, understandably. And really, most parents think that this is an issue that is predominantly something they have to watch out for when it comes to adults. But today, I'm here to share with you why that is a misconception that we need to move away from, and we need to start paying attention to the data. So, today, I'm going to share with you. Let me just share my screen here. I'm going to be talking about peer to peer abuse. I'm going to really be sharing a lot in terms of what it actually means and what you need to be paying attention to. So, we're going to actually cover today, and I'm actually going to make this a three-part series. So, today is part one, where I'm going to talk about the rates and the trends that we're seeing. In part two, I'm going to talk about the age ranges for both abusers and victims. And then in part three, we're going to talk about peer to peer grooming, what those key stages of peer grooming look like, and what we can do to interrupt it so that it doesn't become a problem, right? We don't want this to be an issue in our kids' lives. We don't want to be unaware of the fact that this is even an issue that's happening. We want to be proactive and stay ahead of the game, right? Are you with me? Let me know if you are. Let me know in the comments. And let me know what questions you have because I'm here to answer them today. So if you have questions, post them below, post them here, and I will be able to see them and answer them today. All right, let's dive into it and talk a little bit about, first of all, what peer to peer abuse is versus problematic sexual behavior, also known as PSB, within the world of abuse prevention education, right? So, first of all, let's talk about the fact that peer to peer child sexual abuse refers to sexual abuse that occurs between minors, typically within similar age groups, rather than abuse perpetrated by adults, right? So, obviously, peer to peer means children, minors of similar ages. And research on this specific form of abuse is somewhat limited compared to overall child sexual abuse, but there are some studies and reports that provide estimates or discuss its prevalence. But I just want you to know that concrete data on peer-to-peer abuse rates from as far as back as 2010 in North America are scarce because of underreporting, because of the sensitive nature of the topic, and because of the way that abuse cases are categorized. So First of all, I just want to clarify that one of the things that really makes a difference in terms of the differences between these kinds of abuses is that peer to peer abuse is intentional. It means that there is a element of coercion, there is an element of manipulation, there is absolute intent, knowledge of the intent to act out this kind of sexual behavior with another child. Whereas problematic sexual behavior is usually behavior that happens between minors where there is no specific intentional harm being done. In other words, it might be something that two minors are engaging in because neither of them is aware that this is problematic, that this is not appropriate, right? That it is sexualized behavior that should not be happening between minors. So, an example of this could be where one minor may have experienced abuse or they have been exposed to let's say, adult content, pornographic or explicit content, and now they are enacting this behavior, they're replicating the behavior, but they're also unaware that it's inappropriate. They may have been groomed into believing that it's appropriate if they were abused, and now they are reenacting this with another child. And then that other child is participating perhaps willingly, although it's obviously children can't consent to sexual activity, but they may not be aware that it is inappropriate. So that would be classified as problematic sexual behavior versus peer-to-peer abuse, which is intentional. There is an element of, first of all, understanding that this behavior is inappropriate, but continuing to engage in the behavior or coerce or force another minor into the behavior. So that's the difference between those two. And it's important to understand this because this impacts how we address the situation once it is learned or discovered that minors are engaging in this behavior, right? So that we can determine what kind of actions to take next. In either of these situations, we want to make sure that we're intervening, that we're interfering in disrupting the behavior so that it doesn't continue, so that it doesn't escalate. And then we can determine, based on whether we determine it's abuse or problematic sexual behavior, how to move forward with it, right? So it's really important to understand these two differences so that we know how to address it. What I want to also talk about today is the rates of abuse. So, the National Children's Advocacy Center has noticed an increase in child on child sexual abuse cases. And a study by David Finkelhorn, who is one of the leading researchers in this field, along with his colleagues, it did research and in 2020 came out with findings that said that peer sexual abuse cases are significantly underreported. There is an increase in rates, and especially when boys are victims, they are not reporting. There's a lot of factors as to why they're not reporting. So there is an understanding that the rates for boys are much higher than they were originally understood to be. Awareness and prevention efforts have led to better reporting in recent years, and that may contribute to why we're seeing higher rates. But nevertheless, we are seeing higher rates. So we want to address the fact that whether it was because it was not previously reported or now it is reported, and we know the truth is that the rates are high. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So back in 2009, juveniles were basically 36% of how abuse was happening to minors. So juveniles were 36% of the slice of the pie of how abuse was happening. Now, 36%, that's one third, is a pretty high number to start with, right? We would think, okay, well, that is something that we should be addressing, right? We should be looking at what are the warning signs, What should we be doing? But this wasn't really addressed very much. And then, of course, with the compounding effects of the internet and lots of other factors that have been contributing to the rising rates, in 2017, we saw that this equated to now 40%, up to 40% of how abuse was being perpetrated were by other juveniles. And that was when I entered this field, was in 2017. I started getting educated and trained and certified. And this was the number that I was seeing consistently, was 40%, which again is still quite high. And when we think about it, I think a lot of people don't really understand how peer-to-peer abuse happens. As an example, this might look like siblings abusing siblings. It could look like step siblings abusing step siblings, cousins abusing cousins. This can also look like babysitters that are minors, youth counselors. This can look like peers within schools. So there are ample opportunities for peer-to-peer abuse or problematic sexual behavior to happen. Now, this is something that I've always been aware of since I started learning about this. Again, when I entered this, it was at 40%. Now, jump to 2020, this number has almost doubled. We're looking now at 70% of abuse is perpetrated by juveniles, right? So as we are coming to the end of 2024 and looking towards 2025, we have an opportunity to change these rates, right? So I just want to make sure that we are looking at this as the warning signs are pointing to a big problem that needs to be addressed immediately, or we're looking at the next big wave of Me Too. Because as these minors become young adults, and if these behaviors are not corrected, if these behaviors are not addressed, if these situations are not reported, then we are looking at the possibility that these youth are going to become the next offenders, perpetrators, as they move on into adulthood and continue this behavior if it's not addressed, right? So we really do need to understand why this is so important to be talking about, to be addressing, and not just with our kids, but with other adults in our kids' lives. So that includes educators, this includes camps, youth serving organizations, religious organizations, anywhere that youth are engaging with other youth, and particularly in situations or spaces where there is limited adult supervision or where youth have access to other youth, right? So let's talk about, we're going to also be talking about age and developmental stage, as well as family and environmental factors, as well as gender differences. So I'm going to just cover these really quickly because we are going to go deeper into this in part 2 of our live stream series here, talking about peer-to-peer. So number 1 is that age and developmental stage play a large factor. So children aged between 7 and 12 are frequently identified as both perpetrators and victims of peer-to-peer abuse, although adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 are at higher risk for victimization. And typically this is because this is the age where puberty starts to happen. There are a lot of factors related to kids not understanding, or I should say minors not understanding what a healthy relationship looks like, how to set boundaries, how to respect boundaries, right? So there is a lot of overlap in terms of how those things affect the way that intimate partner violence happens, for example, between teens that are dating, and the potential for exploitation, especially as it relates to online. We're seeing a lot of online victimization as well. And adolescents who abuse are often reacting to complex factors, such as exposure to sexual content. We know we've been seeing high rates of porn exposure, right? And as well as histories of trauma, and that can include different kinds of traumas. So let's look at the family and environmental factors. So this can include factors such as family adversity, if there is a lot of adversity happening within the home, parental absence, and exposure to violence or pornography have been strongly linked to increased risks of sexually abusive behavior among minors. So some other factors that can also contribute is poverty, social isolation, and parental neglect or substance abuse. All of these can play critical roles in contributing to why these rates are on the rise. And then gender differences. We are still seeing that girls are more frequently reported as victims of sexual abuse by peers, but boys can still also be high. We're looking and seeing that boys are also showing high rates, but they are less likely to disclose abuse. So this is leading to underreporting of male victimization. And we also know that LGBTQ plus youth are also at a higher increased risk for abuse, particularly when there is no parental support or family support. We're seeing that this definitely increases the risk. So next week, we're going to talk about specifically diving into the age of perpetration plus signs of grooming, because one thing that we do want to make sure we're talking about is how can we spot signs and how can we intervene, but more importantly, how can we prevent this in the first place, right? So we're going to be diving deeper into those two things in the coming weeks. I'm going to be doing a part 2 where we're going to talk a little bit more about age ranges, how these kinds of situations can happen based on age, right? So although we saw the rates of perpetrators being between 7 and 12, we also have to look at what are the ages of victims that we're talking about, right? So does this include a 4-year-old? Does this include a 2-year-old? Does this include only, kids in maybe first grade and up, right? So we're going to dive into that based on the research and the evidence that we're seeing. How can we increase measures of safety, both in our own home environments? Because again, remember, this can happen within sibling situations, step siblings, cousins, family, and outside of the home within schools, youth serving organizations, sports, religion, right? So we're going to talk about that next time. And then last but not least, we're going to dive into what does grooming look like between peers? Because maybe you've heard about grooming with adults and children and how adults, I did my last live was actually about teaching people what the signs are to look for in terms of adults grooming adults even before they access children. And now we're going to talk in part 3 about peer-to-peer grooming and what that looks like and how youth can also groom adults into giving them access to minors and what that looks like, because I think a lot of people are freaked out when they hear, would a peer groom a child or would it just be assault? Assault is something where there is no premeditation per se. There is no grooming that happens before, and it's just an assault, versus premeditated, calculated grooming with the intent to abuse. So we're going to talk about those differences, what that looks like, what signs you should be looking for, and ultimately how we can prevent it from happening in the first place by putting measures in place that reduce opportunity as well as access. So I hope that you found that helpful today. If you have questions, please, post it in the comments below. If you're watching the replay, you can still participate. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your questions. I'm here to answer them. And I look forward to seeing you in part 2, where we dive into this a little bit deeper. I'm Rosalia Rivera. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you're on Facebook, make sure that you're following me. And if you're on Instagram, make sure that you connect with me on DMs. I'm always hanging out there, and I love to hear your thoughts and questions so that I can answer them in the next live. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.